Thank you, Mr. President. So, what should we call it? What do we call this new bill that the Republicans are rushing through to take away health care from millions of Americans? Is it TrumpCare? Is it RyanCare? Now, it's important to remember that both Paul Ryan and President Trump are branding experts. The president put his name on a line of steaks. He put his name on a magazine, on hotels, and here's the Speaker of the House who has worked pretty hard to be thought of, at least in this town, as a policy wonk, as a serious thinker who has branded everything that he's worked on from the Ryan budget to, quote, a better way. But neither leader of the Republican Party wants to own this thing. And that's because TrumpCare is one of the worst pieces of legislation that I've ever seen. The process has been a total mess, and this is despite the fact that the Republicans had 7 years to work on a plan. At first, they were thinking about doing this without getting a score from the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, and then they realized that even their own members, even their loyal soldiers, didn't want to vote on something without knowing how much it would cost or how many people would lose health care. And now, they're saying that the score either doesn't matter or it's wrong, except for the areas in which they like the score. They spent the last 48 hours trashing the CBO when there is plenty of evidence that for the last 8 years, they referred to the CBO as an expert source when it fit their needs. Look, the legislative process requires hearings. It requires expert testimony. And that's not a mere formality. That's how you get a decent product. And for all the complaints about the way the ACA was passed, they did have hearings. They had discussions. It took over a year. President Obama himself even went to the Republican retreat and personally engaged on policy. Moving this fast without hearings is the kind of thing that you do naming a post office or some other non-controversial measure, or it's the kind of thing you do for something that you don't want people to look at very closely. Because every moment that passes, this coalition phrase, if it ever existed in the first place, now you have criticism from literally left, right, and center. And that's in part because no one saw this coming. No one expected a bill that would look like this. Because during the campaign, this administration promised not to cut Medicaid. They promised that everyone, every single American, would have health insurance. But here we are, and if TrumpCare becomes law, 14 million people will lose their health care next year. Let me repeat that. In just 1 year, 14 million Americans will no longer have the health insurance that they were promised. I want to talk about what that means. What will it mean if people no longer have health care? This week, the Washington Post featured the stories of people in a single county whose lives have changed for the better because of Medicaid. In McDowell County, West Virginia, Medicaid has helped thousands of people get access to physical therapy and immunizations. It's allowed them to see a counselor for mental health problems and opioid addiction. It's helped them to afford the medication that they need instead of relying on free samples from clinics. And these services don't just benefit the individuals. They benefit the whole community by making sure that people are healthy enough so that they can work and contribute to the economy. They allow us to save money by focusing on prevention instead of treatment. So this is what's at stake. These are the services that will go away because TrumpCare is going to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. TrumpCare is going to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. And here's another thing. TrumpCare is also going to impose an age tax that will allow insurance companies to charge older people more money for health insurance, a lot more. And I want to be clear, we're not just talking about senior citizens here. We are talking about people who are pre-Medicare, in other words, anyone under the age of 65 but not exactly young. For example, a 64-year-old will be charged up to 5 times the amount that a 21-year-old will be charged. And the older you get, starting at age 25, the older you get, the more money you will get charged. And that's why the AARP has come out against this bill, because every year that you get older, they will charge you more. This is an age tax. This is a penalty for getting older. And there's an important point here to be made about process, and that is this. This is actually not a health care bill. And that's not a political statement. That's not a rhetorical flourish. Because here's what's going on. If this were a health care bill, it would be new legislation. In order to pass legislation under the rules of the United States Senate, which are agreed upon by both parties over many, many years, you need 60 votes. And the reason that we are working this through reconciliation is because they have nowhere near 60 votes. So what can you do within the reconciliation process? They're basically stuck with dealing with taxes and subsidies because it only requires 51 votes. That's all they can do. This is a tax vehicle. And so then the question becomes, who's getting money and who's getting charged more money? And on that count, this tax bill is one of the biggest wealth transfers in American history. It is a transfer from working-class Americans to rich Americans. That's what this bill does. It takes money from the people who need help the most and gives it to the very wealthy. So here we are in 2017, just a few months out from an election where income inequality was one of the driving issues on both sides of the aisle. And what the Republicans in the House seem to take from that experience is that their mandate is to go in and reduce taxes for insurance executives who make more than $500,000 a year and for the investor class in order to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. It's like they were asleep all of last year. Or maybe they were never very serious about income inequality. We do not need another election to know that this is not what the American people expect from the Congress. They expect bipartisan compromise. They expect results that will make their health care better. My own view is that we can work together on health care, but it requires three things. First, good faith. Second, bipartisanship. And third, legislative hearings. And frankly, we have seen none of these things because the process has been a mess. We need to have a conversation in the light of day and let the American people weigh in. What is the rush? There's no doubt that there's plenty of room for improvement in the existing health care law. But TrumpCare makes it much, much worse. It will cause chaos in the American economy and in 24 million Americans' lives. That's a threat to the progress that we've made over the last 7 years. It's a threat to 1/6 of the American economy. And most of all, it's a threat to the at least 24 million Americans who stand to lose their health care. These threats are the reasons that the Senate needs to come together and say, slow down. Let's work together. Let's work on forming a bipartisan foundation. Let's have hearings. And most importantly, let's not impose this catastrophe in a hurry on the American people.